For a brief shining moment in that Florida courtroom, it looked like Samantha Markle had finally cornered her half-sister. Her legal team was on fire, painting Meghan as a master manipulator who had orchestrated a calculated campaign to destroy Samantha's reputation on the world's biggest stages.
I grew up as an only child, which everyone who grew up around me knows, and I wished I had siblings.
The lawyers were hammering home their argument with surgical precision, calling Meghan's actions a deliberate smorgasbord of defamatory tactics designed to obliterate Samantha while hiding behind royal privilege and celebrity protection. The energy in the room was electric. This was the moment Samantha had been waiting for since that explosive Oprah interview back in 2021. Finally, someone was going to hold Meghan Markle accountable for the words that had allegedly turned Samantha's life into a living nightmare of death threats and public humiliation.
I believe she had a clear motive for writing family off because it would seemingly justify and perhaps delay the revelation of all of the lies that she had told the royal family.
Her legal team was painting a picture of systematic destruction, claiming Meghan had weaponized her platform to annihilate her own family member while the world watched and cheered. But then something shifted in that courtroom, and it wasn't in Samantha's favor. Chief U.S. Circuit Judge William Pryor's expression began to change as he listened to the arguments. What started as judicial attention slowly morphed into something that looked dangerously close to skepticism.
Dad didn't do anything, and she just woke up one day in a new world and decided that she doesn't have any family.
The other judges on the panel were exchanging glances that sent chills down the spines of everyone watching this legal drama unfold. The momentum that had been building for Samantha's case suddenly felt like it was crashing into an invisible wall. The bombshell twist that nobody saw coming was about to flip this entire legal battle on its head, and the implications would reach far beyond just these two sisters locked in their bitter family feud. Because what happened next in that appellate courtroom could determine whether Meghan Markle walks away unscathed once again, or if justice finally catches up with the Duchess of Sussex in the most spectacular way possible.
Ongoing saga, yet another chapter with more megalomania. They're going to dig out all of those insults. They're going to keep referencing the with love Meghan. Well, I can tell you there's no love lost between those two.
To understand how we got to this explosive courtroom showdown, we need to go back to the moment that started this entire legal war. It was March 2021, and the world was glued to their screens watching Meghan Markle sit across from Oprah Winfrey in what would become one of the most controversial interviews in royal history. But while millions were focused on Meghan's shocking revelations about the royal family, one person was watching with growing fury from her home in Florida. Samantha Markle couldn't believe what she was hearing.
In 2022, the Duchess of Sussex, estranged half-sister Samantha Markle, sued Meghan Markle for allegedly defaming her in multiple interviews, including that 2021 tell-all with Oprah Winfrey.
Her half-sister was painting a picture of their family that, according to Samantha, was completely false and deliberately destructive. Meghan spoke about growing up as an only child, claimed she barely knew Samantha, and suggested their relationship was practically non-existent. To Samantha, these weren't just casual misstatements, they were calculated lies designed to erase her from Meghan's origin story entirely. The Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan, that dropped in December 2022, was the final straw. Samantha watched in horror as Meghan doubled down on her narrative, further cementing what Samantha believed were damaging falsehoods about their family dynamic. The series reached millions of viewers worldwide, and with each episode, Samantha felt her reputation being systematically demolished on a global scale. But here's where it gets really messy. Samantha wasn't just upset about being written out of Meghan's story. She was claiming that Meghan's words had real, devastating consequences for her life. According to the lawsuit filed in Florida, Samantha began receiving death threats from Meghan's supporters, who believed the narrative that Samantha was essentially a stranger trying to cash in on royal fame. Her social media became a battleground of harassment, and she claimed her ability to work and maintain relationships was completely destroyed. The defamation lawsuit that followed was nuclear. Samantha wasn't asking for a simple apology or retraction. She was demanding accountability in the form of serious financial damages. Her legal team argued that Meghan had used the biggest platforms in entertainment to launch a targeted attack against her own family member, knowing full well that her words would reach hundreds of millions of people worldwide. And that's when this family feud transformed from petty sibling drama into a high-stakes legal battle that would test the limits of free speech, family loyalty, and whether anyone, even a duchess, could be held accountable for words that allegedly destroy lives. Meghan's legal team didn't mess around when they saw Samantha's lawsuit coming their way. They assembled what can only be described as a legal dream team. the kind of high-powered attorneys who specialize in making problems disappear for A-list celebrities and royal family members. Their strategy was brilliant, ruthless, and designed to end this family drama before it could drag Meghan through months of embarrassing depositions and courtroom theatrics. The defense they mounted was like watching a masterclass in celebrity legal protection. Instead of getting bogged down in he said, she said family drama, Meghan's lawyers went straight for the legal jugular. They argued that everything Meghan had said about Samantha fell into one of two categories that are nearly impossible to win defamation cases against. Either her statements were protected opinions, or they were substantially true enough that they couldn't be considered defamatory under the law. Here's where it gets really clever. Meghan's legal team essentially said that when she described her childhood experience and her relationship with Samantha, she was sharing her personal perspective and lived experience. Courts are extremely reluctant to tell someone that their own feelings and perceptions about their family relationships are wrong. It's almost impossible to prove that someone's emotional truth about their own childhood is legally defamatory. But they didn't stop there. The defense also argued that even if some of Meghan's statements could be seen as factual claims rather than opinions, they were substantially true enough to avoid defamation liability. They painted a picture of Samantha as someone who had indeed been largely absent from Meghan's life for significant periods, making Meghan's characterization of their relationship accurate enough to pass legal muster. The federal judge who first heard the case bought this defense completely. In a devastating ruling for Samantha, the court dismissed the entire lawsuit, essentially saying that Samantha had failed to prove that Meghan's statements were both false and defamatory. It was a legal knockout punch that left Samantha's case lying flat on the courtroom floor. The dismissal was humiliating for Samantha on multiple levels. Not only had she failed to get her day in court against Meghan, but the judge's ruling essentially validated Meghan's version of their family story in the eyes of the law. It was like watching Samantha get defeated twice, once in the court of public opinion and again in an actual court of law. But Samantha Markle is nothing if not persistent, and this legal defeat was about to become the launching pad for an even more dramatic legal battle. Samantha Markle was not about to let her half-sister walk away that easily. The federal court dismissal stung, but it wasn't the end of the road. It was just the beginning of an even more intense legal war. Within weeks of that devastating ruling, Samantha's legal team was already preparing what they believed would be their comeback story. They were taking this fight to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and this time, they were convinced they had the ammunition to blow Meghan's defense apart. The appeal wasn't just a legal Hail Mary. It was Samantha's declaration that she would rather spend every dollar she had fighting this battle than let Meghan get away with what she saw as a systematic destruction campaign. Her lawyers were painting this as more than just a family dispute. They were framing it as a case about whether powerful celebrities could use massive media platforms to destroy private citizens without consequences. Samantha's legal team came out swinging with arguments that were designed to make the appellate judges see this case in a completely different light. They argued that the lower court had gotten it wrong, that Meghan's statements weren't protected opinions at all, but deliberate factual lies designed to cause maximum damage to Samantha's reputation. They claimed the original judge had been too quick to dismiss the case without fully considering the evidence of Meghan's alleged defamatory campaign. The stakes of this appeal couldn't have been higher. If Samantha won, it would mean dragging Meghan back into court for what could be years of litigation, depositions, and public scrutiny. Meghan would have to sit for questioning under oath about her family relationships, her motivations for the statements she made, and potentially face a jury trial where ordinary Americans would decide whether she owed Samantha millions in damages. But there was something even bigger at play here. This appeal wasn't just about Samantha getting her revenge. It was about setting a legal precedent that could change how celebrities and public figures talk about their families in public. If Samantha succeeded, it could open the floodgates for family members of other celebrities to start suing over unflattering portrayals in interviews, documentaries, and memoirs. Samantha's legal team knew they were fighting an uphill battle, but they believed they had identified fatal flaws in the original court's reasoning that would force the appellate judges to give her another shot at justice. They were about to find out just how wrong they could be. The moment Samantha's lawyers stood up to present their appeal, you could feel the tension crackling through that appellate courtroom. This was their big moment, their chance to convince 3 federal judges that Meghan Markle had gotten away with legal murder and deserved to be dragged back into court to face the consequences. But what happened next was like watching a slow-motion car crash that nobody could stop. Samantha's legal team launched into their argument with all the confidence of lawyers who believed they had found the smoking gun. They painted Meghan as a master manipulator who had orchestrated what they called a smorgasbord of defamatory tactics across multiple high-profile media appearances. According to their argument, this wasn't just casual family drama spilling into the public eye. This was a calculated campaign designed to annihilate Samantha's reputation while Meghan positioned herself as the innocent victim. The lawyers were passionate, they were detailed, and they clearly believed every word they were saying. They argued that Meghan had deliberately chosen the biggest stages in entertainment, from Oprah's couch to Netflix's global platform, to spread what they claimed were provable lies about Samantha. They insisted that the lower court had been fooled by Meghan's legal team's clever framing of destructive lies as protected personal opinions. But here's where everything started to unravel for Samantha's case. Chief U.S. Circuit Judge William Pryor began asking questions that cut straight to the heart of their legal argument, and his tone suggested he wasn't buying what they were selling. The judge started pointing out gaps in their reasoning, questioning whether they had adequately addressed the standards that protect speech, especially when it comes to family relationships and personal experiences. The other judges on the panel began joining in with their own pointed questions, and it became clear that Samantha's legal team was struggling to provide satisfactory answers. They had come prepared to give a passionate speech about Meghan's alleged wrongdoing, but they seemed unprepared for the technical legal challenges that the appellate court was throwing at them. Judge Pryor delivered what felt like a devastating blow when he criticized the appeal for glossing over key evidentiary issues and legal standards that had been central to the lower court's decision. He basically accused Samantha's lawyers of failing to do their homework, of not fully addressing the legal reasoning that had protected Meghan's statements in the first place. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from tense anticipation to something that felt dangerously close to judicial skepticism, and Samantha's legal dreams were starting to crumble in real time. Behind the scenes of this legal disaster, the cracks in Samantha's strategy were becoming impossible to ignore. Her legal team had walked into that appellate courtroom, believing they had identified the fatal flaws in the lower court's reasoning. But what they discovered was that their own understanding of defamation law might have been the real problem all along. The judges weren't just skeptical, they were pointing out fundamental gaps in Samantha's legal argument that suggested her lawyers had misunderstood the very basics of what makes a defamation case winnable. The most damaging revelation was that Samantha's legal team had failed to adequately counter the district court's core finding that Meghan's statements were either substantially true or protected opinion. This wasn't just a technical oversight, it was a catastrophic failure that went to the heart of their entire case. Defamation law has very specific requirements, and if you can't prove that the statements in question were both false and presented as fact rather than opinion, your case is dead in the water. Judge Pryor's criticism wasn't just about legal technicalities, it was about Samantha's lawyers apparently not understanding the burden of proof they needed to meet. The appellate court was essentially saying that Samantha hadn't even managed to clear the basic legal hurdles necessary to have a viable defamation claim, let alone prove that Meghan had engaged in the systematic destruction campaign they were alleging. What made this even more embarrassing for Samantha was that her legal team seemed unprepared for the most obvious questions the appellate judges would ask. They had spent months preparing dramatic arguments about Meghan's alleged manipulation and destruction tactics, but they appeared to have neglected the fundamental legal groundwork that would make any of those arguments matter in a court of law. The judges were also unimpressed with Samantha's failure to address the free speech implications of her case. Courts are extremely protective of the right to speak about personal experiences and family relationships, especially when those statements are made in the context of interviews and documentaries, where personal perspective is expected. Samantha's team seemed to have underestimated how difficult it would be to convince judges that Meghan's personal narrative should be subject to defamation liability. Behind the confident public statements and dramatic legal filings, sources close to the case were beginning to whisper that Samantha's legal strategy had been flawed from the very beginning. The appeal that was supposed to be her legal comeback was starting to look more like her final defeat, and everyone in that courtroom could feel the momentum shifting decisively against her. While Samantha's legal team was crumbling under judicial scrutiny, Meghan's lawyers were sitting back and watching their defense strategy work like a perfectly oiled machine. They had built what can only be described as an impenetrable legal fortress around Meghan, using the most powerful weapons in the defamation defense arsenal: free speech protections and the sacred distinction between opinion and provable fact. The genius of Meghan's defense wasn't just that it protected her from Samantha's specific accusations, it was that it created a legal framework that made it almost impossible for anyone to successfully sue her for talking about her own family experiences. Her lawyers had essentially argued that when Meghan described her childhood, her relationships, and her family dynamics, she was sharing her personal truth, and personal truth enjoys some of the strongest legal protections in the American justice system. Here's where Meghan's legal team really showed their expertise. They weren't just saying that Meghan's statements were opinions, they were arguing that even if some of her statements could be considered factual claims, they were substantially true enough to avoid defamation liability. This created a double layer of protection that made Samantha's case nearly impossible to win. Either Meghan's statements were protected opinions that couldn't be defamatory, or they were factual enough to be legally defensible. The free speech shield that Meghan's lawyers constructed was particularly brilliant because it tapped into fundamental American legal principles that courts are extremely reluctant to undermine. The right to speak about your own life experiences, especially in the context of interviews and documentaries, is considered so essential to free expression that judges will bend over backwards to protect it. Meghan's team had essentially wrapped her statements in the American flag of constitutional protection. But the most devastating part of Meghan's defense was how it flipped the entire narrative of the case. Instead of Meghan being the aggressor who had attacked Samantha through media appearances, Meghan's lawyers painted her as someone exercising her fundamental right to tell her own story. They positioned Samantha as the aggressor trying to use the court system to silence Meghan's protected speech about her own family experiences. The appellate court seemed to be buying this defense completely. The judge's questions suggested they were far more concerned about protecting Meghan's right to speak about her own life than they were about Samantha's claims of reputational damage. It was becoming clear that Meghan's legal team had chosen the perfect strategy to not just win this specific case, but to make it virtually impossible for any family member to successfully sue her for similar statements in the future. The most heartbreaking part of Samantha's legal battle wasn't just the courtroom defeats, it was the human cost she claimed to have paid for being caught in Meghan's media spotlight. According to court documents, Samantha's life had become a living nightmare of harassment, threats, and social isolation that she directly blamed on her half-sister's public statements. But the question haunting this entire legal drama was whether any court would actually care about Samantha's suffering enough to hold Meghan accountable. Samantha's legal team painted a devastating picture of what happened after Meghan's Oprah interview aired to a global audience of millions. They claimed that Meghan's characterization of their relationship had turned Samantha into a target for fanatical royal supporters who saw her as a villain trying to exploit Meghan's fame. The death threats started almost immediately, flooding her social media accounts and even reaching her personal phone number and email addresses. The harassment wasn't just random internet trolling. According to Samantha's lawyers, they argued that Meghan's statements had created a specific narrative that painted Samantha as a greedy, manipulative family member who had never been close to Meghan but was now trying to cash in on royal connections. This narrative allegedly gave Meghan's supporters a clear target for their rage, and they unleashed years of pent-up frustration about royal family critics directly at Samantha. But here's where Samantha's emotional distress claims ran into a legal brick wall. Courts have very specific requirements for proving that someone's speech caused legally compensable emotional harm, and it's incredibly difficult to draw a direct line from public statements to the actions of third parties. Meghan's lawyers could easily argue that they weren't responsible for how unhinged fans chose to interpret and act on her statements about her family relationships. The most tragic aspect of Samantha's claims was that she alleged the harassment had destroyed not just her social media presence, but her ability to work and maintain relationships in her real life. She claimed that potential employers, friends, and even romantic partners had been scared away by the negative attention and threats that followed her everywhere after Meghan's media appearances. Yet the appellate court seemed unmoved by these emotional appeals. The judges appeared focused on legal standards rather than human suffering, and their questions suggested they viewed Samantha's damages as too speculative and indirect to support a defamation case. It was becoming painfully clear that even if Samantha's claims about harassment and threats were completely true, the legal system might not provide the remedy she was desperately seeking. Legal experts watching this appellate hearing weren't just analyzing a family feud, they were witnessing what could become a landmark case about celebrity speech, family privacy, and the limits of defamation law in the social media age. The consensus among defamation specialists was becoming increasingly clear, and it wasn't good news for Samantha Markle. Every legal analyst who had been following this case was starting to reach the same devastating conclusion. Samantha's chances weren't just slim, they were practically non-existent. The fundamental problem with Samantha's case, according to legal scholars, was that she had chosen to fight a battle that defamation law simply wasn't designed to handle. Modern defamation law evolved to protect robust public debate and personal expression, which means courts are extremely reluctant to punish people for sharing their own life stories, even when those stories are unflattering to family members. Samantha was essentially asking the legal system to referee a family dispute that had spilled into public view. Constitutional law professors were particularly harsh in their assessment of Samantha's appeal strategy. They pointed out that the appellate court's skeptical questions weren't just about this specific case. They reflected broader concerns about using defamation law to silence protected speech. If courts started holding celebrities liable for how they described their family relationships, it could create a chilling effect that would fundamentally change how public figures talk about their personal lives. The implications for royal family drama were especially significant. Legal experts noted that if Samantha had succeeded, it could have opened the door for other royal family members to start suing over unflattering portrayals in interviews, books, and documentaries. The entire cottage industry of royal tell-all media could have been threatened by a successful outcome in Samantha's case, which may have been another factor working against her in court. But the most damning analysis came from defamation specialists, who pointed out that Samantha's legal team had failed to understand the basic requirements for winning a defamation case against a public figure discussing personal relationships. They needed to prove not just that Meghan's statements were false, but that they were made with actual malice or reckless disregard for the truth. This is an incredibly high bar that protects robust debate about public figures and their families. The writing was on the wall, and legal experts weren't being subtle about it. Multiple prominent defamation attorneys predicted that the 11th Circuit would uphold the dismissal, effectively ending Samantha's legal crusade against her half-sister. The only question remaining was whether the appellate court would write an opinion that would make it even harder for future family members to bring similar cases against celebrities and public figures. The ripple effects of Samantha's impending legal defeat would extend far beyond just losing a court case. They could fundamentally alter the power dynamic between the Markle sisters forever. If the 11th Circuit upholds the dismissal as legal experts predict, Samantha wouldn't just be walking away empty-handed. She could be facing a legal landscape where challenging Meghan's public narrative becomes virtually impossible. The defeat could effectively silence her for years to come, giving Meghan complete control over how their family story gets told to the world. Think about the psychological impact of this legal humiliation on Samantha. She had staked everything on this lawsuit, spending what sources suggest could be hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, enduring years of public scrutiny, and putting her entire reputation on the line for what she believed was her chance at justice. A devastating appellate court defeat wouldn't just be a legal loss, it would be a public validation of Meghan's version of their family history that could haunt Samantha for the rest of her life. The financial consequences could be catastrophic for Samantha as well. Losing defendants in defamation cases sometimes face the possibility of paying the winner's legal fees, and Meghan's high-powered legal team doesn't come cheap. There's a real possibility that Samantha could end up owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover Meghan's attorney costs, turning her failed revenge plot into a financial nightmare that could follow her for decades. But the broader implications for the Markle family dynamic are even more chilling. If Samantha loses this appeal definitively, it could embolden Meghan to speak even more freely about her family relationships without fear of legal consequences. Meghan could potentially write books, give more interviews, or produce additional documentaries about her family life, knowing that the legal system has essentially given her a free pass to share her version of events without worrying about defamation liability. The defeat could also have devastating consequences for any other Markle family members who might be considering their own legal action against Meghan. Thomas Markle, Meghan's father, has been notably absent from this legal battle, but he's made his own public statements about feeling misrepresented by Meghan's media appearances. If Samantha's case crashes and burns completely, it would send a clear message to other family members that challenging Meghan in court is a losing proposition that could leave them financially ruined and publicly humiliated. Perhaps most importantly, this legal defeat could mark the end of Samantha's ability to stay relevant in the ongoing royal family media circus. Much of her public profile has been built around her opposition to Meghan and her claims about their family relationship. If the courts definitively reject her version of events, she could find herself marginalized from the very media attention that has kept her in the public eye. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is now sitting on what could be the most consequential decision in the ongoing Markle family saga, and legal insiders are whispering that the ruling could drop at any moment. When those three judges finally release their decision, it won't just determine whether Samantha gets another shot at Meghan in court, it could fundamentally reshape how celebrity family feuds play out in the legal system for years to come. The anticipation is reaching fever pitch, and everyone involved knows that this decision will be the final word on whether justice exists for those who claim to be destroyed by royal family drama. If the appellate court upholds the dismissal as expected, it will slam the door shut on Samantha's legal crusade with a finality that even she might not be able to appeal further. The Supreme Court rarely takes defamation cases, especially ones involving family disputes and celebrity speech, which means this appellate decision could be the absolute end of the road for Samantha's quest for legal vindication. She would have exhausted every legal avenue available to her, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of total defeat. But here's where this story takes an even more dramatic turn. Sources close to both camps suggest that the real battle might just be beginning, regardless of what the court decides. If Samantha loses, insiders speculate she could pivot to a full-scale media war against Meghan, using every platform available to tell her side of the story without the constraints of legal proceedings. She could write books, give explosive interviews, or even launch her own documentary series to counter Meghan's narrative. On the flip side, if Samantha somehow pulls off a miracle victory and gets her case reinstated, it would trigger what legal experts are calling a potential nuclear option for celebrity privacy. Meghan would face the prospect of years more litigation, invasive depositions about her family relationships, and potentially a jury trial where ordinary Americans would decide whether she owes her half-sister millions of dollars in damages. The broader implications for the royal family are staggering. This case has become a test of whether anyone can hold members of the extended royal family accountable for their public statements about each other. A win for Samantha could embolden other royal family members to consider their own legal action, while a loss could give royals even more freedom to share their personal truths without fear of family backlash. As the legal world holds its breath waiting for the 11th Circuit's decision, One thing is absolutely certain. This ruling will mark either the beginning of Samantha's ultimate vindication or the final chapter in her failed attempt to bring down the Duchess of Sussex. The next few weeks could change everything we know about the Markle family war, and the implications will reverberate far beyond just these two sisters locked in their bitter battle for control of their family's legacy. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Samantha deserves her day in court, or should Meghan's right to tell her own story be protected? Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video is waiting, and you won't believe what's coming next.